inviting our last speaker in this panel today, so Nika Grabar. She graduated from the Faculty of Architecture in Ljubljana, and her work actually as a young researcher at the Institute of Architecture and Space. She got Fulbright Fellowship and was affiliated with the Columbia University in New York from 2007-2008. And she really worked in amazing projects related to architectural, historical, theoretical research. Like in 2016, she curated and designed the exhibition of video works under the name The Effects of Proximity. And she's also an active member of the group Monument, and also working from 2017 to 18, participating in the project mapping and archiving public space. So Nika, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Does this work? Yes. I will try to navigate these two machines. It's up there. When putting the presentation together, I kind of realized that maybe I'm trying to do too much, because actually one aspect of my work, I realized, very much conditioned the other aspect of my work. So I was trying to navigate. So even though maybe I will not be completely concise, I will be happy to answer your questions on when I will have the breaks, so please do. So I entitled my presentation Povojni, ne-mir, post-war non-peace. It was translated, but actually this ne-mir also means disorder, unrest, uneasiness, restlessness. I made these connections that are somehow in the background of my work that relate to different spatial planning methodologies. And I will mainly go in the presentation through the dilemmas of this post-war spatial planning I covered in different research projects, basically to come back to the work we do as art research collective non-human group, which I have come to understand is basically very much a reaction to the dilemmas I will describe. So this reaction resulted in creating, for me, quite like a platform in which we deal with the ruinous space of today, I would say, and how I actually understand it as planning that depoliticizes very much the body and makes it possible for different interests to precondition management of different territories. So monument that I will describe what it means afterwards, but it became for me a site of investigation and at the same time for a possibility of artistic action. And it was a long and complicated way to come to this point, and it had to do a lot about rethink, not so much about peace, but a war as a part of peace. Because in the seeming absence of armed conflict after Second World War, we often forget about Cold War that was still basically a war, and about the fact that many contexts we today look back to were in fact conditioned and supported by the interests of war. So in this context, I would like to, draw attention to the emergence of the US military-industrial complex. Because with the onset of Second World War, actually President Roosevelt established the War Production Board to coordinate civilian industries and shift them into wartime production. So this continued throughout the Cold War period up to the end of the Warsaw Pact and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And even into the 90s, post-90s, where these defense contractors either consolidated or shifted their focus to civilian innovation and made tons of money. So I wrote in the abstract that the institutional framework of the post-Second World War with the World Bank, with the United Nations, and with the IMF claims peace as an unconditional value. However, the way planning mechanisms today that we use work continue to produce very much conflicting conditions with the MIC, I will call it, which is the military-industrial complex, being a large part of it in physical space and amongst people. So though they might be temporarily working at times, present-day planning strategies come from a context of Cold War, the war that came after armed conflict, and the context in which the American military-industrial complex very much persisted until the present day. So, the President Eisenhower famously warned US citizens in 1961 that, and here's the quote, "A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. The conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development. We must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisitions of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of a misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes." So the reason I want to make this visible is because the existence of it is very much a modern invention, post-Second World War invention, and is present. It conditions the spatial conditions of our everyday globally, and it continues to be a conflicting as it ever was, even more dangerous after the end of Cold War. Why? Like it was said in the beginning, I speak as an architect that does not build. Instead, I research and have gone into the details of ideology of planning and can, after spending many, many years with my head in the archives on the topics of post-Second World War, 48 to 51, 60s, in which I encountered different involvements of architects, as well as how the institutional backbone of spatial planning evolved, I just would like to make these claims. How we plan and construct physical space from infrastructure, institutions, apartments is undemocratic, unconstitutional, and to this day extends the problematic ideologies of Cold War into the present to construct consumerist space with all its violent aspects. At the same time, still, I think it's very much relevant to talk about peace. The reason I'm presenting it in such a direct, diplomatic way is because there is a link between architecture and planning that makes the role of architecture important for envisioning peace in the long run. Because with the built environment, we plan activities in space, and in this context, architecture plays a representational role, a symbolic role. It opens question of materiality as well as content. And the built environment is, in fact, the main driver of investment. And I will be very concrete in relating it back to the MIC, which, like I said, did not disappear after the Second World War, when the US economy was facing hyperproduction. When the Marshall Plan was outlined in 1947 and executed in 1948 for reconstructing Europe, the participating countries paid for their development plans themselves according to the needs of the US economy. At the same time, the US donated the same budget in technology and knowledge to construct. So basically, the investments were calculated to have made a return on investment in ratio 1:6 for the American side, of course. Communist countries were invited to join the Marshall Plan, but didn't. Of course, there could be a whole lecture just on that. Instead, at the same time, in 1947, USSR launched the Molotov Plan with the similar aim. What is interesting in this context is the critique that Molotov was making against the Marshall Plan. He described it publicly as non-democratic, since investment interests preconditioned development about which sovereign nations had no right to decide upon. So the background for envisioning development of nation states were really the interests of the US industry. The democratic argument echoed amongst architects as well. When establishing the UIA, which is an international union of architects in 1947 in Switzerland, an initiative led by the architect Pierre Vago, they were striving to make an environment to join forces of the East and West for architects to create a peaceful, prosperous, post-Second World War world. Interestingly, the representatives of Eastern countries wanted the UIA's charter to define the organization as democratic, while several of the Western colleagues opposed. The issue is again an important one because the conflict make visible the cracks we live in until today. What was at stake? In trying to build a better world, the architects of one and the other bloc were facing contradictions on both sides. The Western investments made it possible to build and reconstruct, but the development plans in total were in fact supporting anti-communist goals. The Eastern colleagues, trying to build a socialist communist reality, criticized the conditions in the West in a sense that the position of the architect only furthered the interests of capital, resulting many times in impoverished architectural work. And I quote, "Even in so wealthy a country as the US, where one would have thought architecture should enjoy extensive opportunities, we do not observe much progress in that sphere," Karol Labian, a Soviet-American architect, said. When drafting the Charter of the Union, the Russian architects were striving for it to be, and I quote, "an association of progressive, democratic organization of workers in architecture that undertake to struggle for enduring peace, reinforcement of democracy, and progress in culture. These should be watchdogs under which the organization should act in contact with all other organizations of intellectual workers. Such a united front would make a valuable contribution to the advancement of democracy and culture." Well, Belgians and British had opposed the motion. The French and Swiss supported it. However, for Vischer and Walker of the US, the wording deliberately contradicted the spirit of the UIA that was to be for them an organization with absolutely no political aims. Politics in this sense was for them a dirty word to be avoided. In the end, the organization became defined as a platform in which architects would collaborate with the engineer, the economist, the sociologist, the jurist, but not with politicians. Nonetheless, really the union played a considerable role in constructing post-war world, especially in developing conditions for international architectural competitions, and is in fact, until today, the only union of architects recognized by the UN. In terms of investment, Yugoslavia that joined the organization in 1948, with many complications due to the Stalin-Tito break, was not included not in the Marshall nor Molotov plan. It was, however, interesting for political and economic support to become a story of success after turning a new page in 48. So it was to be shown as a country that was seeking a socialist future, experimenting with the notion of capitalist economy, and this had to do with building, of course, with building. So to the east, it was to represent a country enjoying the fruits of both worlds away from the USSR. to the West, incorporating a rethinking of how to merge socialist state with capitalist planning. Several transformations of the Yugoslav state constitutions were adopted up to the mid-70s, and what is interesting are the details of planning that developed out of the so-called American Yugoslav project. In the 1960s, this was a collaborative project developed between the Urban Planning Institute and the Wayne State University in the period of 66 to 72, a project that was supported by the US and the Yugoslav government as well as the Ford Foundation. The results were not concrete projects, rather it resulted in convoluted planning procedures at time involving computing, which reflect the same actual problems of decision-making in reference to the Marshall Plan. Planning space, which was the backbone of the project, revolved around planning the much-needed modernist infrastructure through establishing new planning centers. And it worked well. Regional planning protocols that were conceived with the American Yugoslav project made it possible for further investment of the West, with loans of the World Bank, with the involvement of the UN, construct housing, factories, infrastructure, tourist facilities, etc., and at the same time calculate the return on investment. The new planning methodology even made it possible to open doors for Western investments in the Eastern Bloc. This continued well after the 72, when the project actually ended. However, in the 90s, the funding switched from supporting development plans to supporting NGOs all across Eastern Europe, except Russia. These investments had a clear goal: to win the war against communism and open the doors and minds of Marxist Europe. The results were positive for both sides: no armed conflict, construction on large scale, the everyday transformed and brought the desired goods. Socialist welfare states were in good shape, and so was the MIC, military-industrial complex. However, the development came with a price. The sophisticated, convoluted planning procedures were designed to be presented as specialist and objective, but only as lip service, pro forma, and were anything but democratic. The contours of investments, envisioned as regional planning visions, never really coincided with any political boundaries, be it municipal, republic, or of the state. Political activities organizing people in space with institutional support thus never corresponded with how planning of developing regions unfolded. Still, with state-planned economy, it managed to produce an illusion of peaceful environment, which again had its function in Cold War. The price to be paid for losing the language, so to speak, with which the future was planned is to be paid now, after the 90s. When the fear of communist nationalization is no longer there, a threat, quite the opposite. What was state-owned became privatized, and actually doors to investment were opened under new conditions. The need to support an open socialist country and create peace with building for the people as a viable vision of the future is, in the absence of Cold War, just not there anymore. The problem we are facing out of the situation, I find, is threefold. Planning mechanisms that serve the context of Cold War, not peace, interests are still the same. The vision of the future we institutionally accept is still based on carbon economy that is increasingly destructive in terms of energy consumption, as well of material and waste management. And the only thing on the table right now is green transition to confront it. In the absence of societal plan, depoliticized question of space continues to be the driving force for investment that makes our everyday environment, but fails on a subjective level to present a credible future for us. So, is it possible to envision peace with the problematic notion of space being constructed? The condition is new in human experience. vast, complicated institutional framework dealing with planning mechanisms claiming to be democratic but are in fact not. But at the same time, this is the context in which our subjectivity forms and we construct meaning. It is a convoluted one, but it is only in recognizing it and reacting to it, not merely as specialists, but also politically making use of all the contexts at our disposal, change is possible, maybe. I mean, most probably I said nothing new. Maybe I pointed out, dragged out some details that maybe you didn't know about, but why do I think is very much relevant? Because maintaining peace means more than the absence of armed conflict, and constructing a viable future, if we strive for it to be peaceful, cannot serve the interest of MIC. Thus, the goal for democracy is really a much larger political question than what circulates around the media today. It is one of the most abused words. Given the violent, destructive nature of contemporary culture, it is a true challenge for communities locally and globally to organize politically. What the past teaches us is that different visions are actually, in fact, possible. We can think them, make them viable, imagine them. And the context invented in the Cold War laid ground for unprecedented ideas, not to be copied, but critically rethought. So these parts are a part of our present-day subjectivity and in which we base our values despite the violent collapse of many states in the 90s and that continue today. So it is a conflicting present with a conflicting past that will persist, and for that reason, nostalgia, that was mentioned before, has consequently really become a global currency. And at the same time, it can be a dangerous one if not examined critically. It can create phantom homelands people are ready to kill for, as Svetlana Boym would argue. So we invented a new context to navigate with monuments. And we define monument as architecture, monuments, public spaces, and infrastructure whose meaning has transformed due to societal or political change. The meaning of built environment is actually what we question in different ways and forms as a collective. And a part of our work really involves research of past and present of differences in space. So this is what I do now as an architect, aside from teaching, because I find it kind of difficult to make projects. So I research different pasts that show cracks of past and futures, for I believe in this condition there is an urgent need for a safe space in which things can appear as they are, related to ideology we encounter in space. And this is what we try to address also in the context of the monument group with Nea Tomšić, Martin Bricar-Baraga, and Miloš Kosec, to basically open space for reflection and action in different ways, be it in terms of discussion, events, and projects. And if there was a meaning before and after, there are different pasts and different futures possible that have parallel lives. And one of such stories was also the Pioneer Railway, the space of which we can still sense in Ljubljana today, going by bike from Rožna Dolina to Podutik. And this was a railway that was constructed and run by children, which talks about the future, about the responsibility, about labor, action, vision, and people that constructed it are still alive. So working on a project for them created a strong sense of identity and belonging. So at the location, we organized a sound walk, a performance that Nea later turned into a video. And I mean, I will not say about it anything more because it is not about this particular project that I'm trying to talk about. The thing is, I can show the video afterwards in the background if you wish to, or you can see it at the museum, where it is currently on display. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because I believe that this MIC, industrial complex, actually continues being ruinous, and this is the time that we live in with this condition, and we have to deal with the ruins and build new communities around them, and that is, I think, of vital importance if we want to understand the backbone of how visions and space work hand in hand. So even though I claim that planning interests that do not exclude war, depoliticize communities and thus the body, as well as precondition management of territories, monument for me is actually a site for investigation and a possibility for engagement, as well as for a specific collective remembrance to take place. Thank you.